Hello everyone, I am Reyna and today I'm going to present the Modernism cast iron architecture. To start with a little bit of the Modernism, this was an artistic movement of renewal that took place from the end of the 19th century to the mid 20th century. It stood out for its interest in breaking traditional styles, for the search of new forms of expression and aesthetics. It was inspired mainly by nature, and it was very contrary to the elements of the Industrial Revolution. Um, the modernism transcended mainly as a literary movement, but along other artistic disciplines as painting, sculpture, architecture, and music, it sought to connect art with nature. The movement was a reaction in opposition to the new industrial and urbanized world. It received a lot of accepted names to describe it. Between them, there was Art Nouveau, Modern Style, and Liberty. This variety of names reveals a little bit of the character of freedom and breaking with structures that characterize the movement itself. It was characterized by breaking the rules that were considered traditional both in religious and political as well as social issues. It had a new ideology and style which broke with the previous realism that could be seen, and it it believed that the truth was relative and that there is no absolute truth. And it was also an exacerbation of the individual and his inner strength that influenced subjectivists, impressionist, expressionist, and surrealist movements. Modernism sought to break with established order and rules of bourgeoisie and attempted to create art that was accessible to all social classes without pursuing the mass production techniques that were industrialized in society. It also represented themes such as love and in an erotic and sensual tone that was very unlike in that romanticism, and it evoked distant places um, from ancient times, and it used a language that was considered prohibited at the time. Now, with cast iron architecture, this was an architectural and constructive style that was originated in the 18th century. It arrived with the Industrial Revolution, and it was this one that led to the construction of huge buildings and structures that used iron as a building material, or steel, which is combination of iron and carbon in certain proportions. So as we can see, it is kind of a predecessor of the modernism. Modernism was this break from the industrial part of the world, while cast iron architecture sought to reflect these new technologies that were existing at the time. Cast iron architecture is then basically a building or other type of structure like a bridge or a fountain that is being constructed in whole or in part with prefabricated um, cast iron. The buildings were mainly factories, hangars, bridges, and train stations and markets. But there were other buildings that were built, but that didn't have really a practical function. It was merely ornamental. Um, okay, so at the beginning, the iron architecture could clearly be observed in the construction of bridges in the 18th century, such as the Iron Bridge of Coalbrookdale, which was famous during the industrial industry as it became the first arch bridge manufactured using cast iron. However, despite the incorporation of cast iron in these engineering structures, architects uh, really just continued using the traditional materials because it was considered by the academic taste as of bad taste. It wasn't until the industrial architecture that was incorporated into actual architecture. It was initially just a protection measure against fires, which had become really common due to the introduction of the steam engine. And the first construction we can find in this big scale was a factory in a part of Ditherington near Shrewsbury in England between 1696 and 1697. The iron was presented several times as a novelty as a construction material in international fairs. For example, the plans of the Crystal Palace and drawings of its viewing interior were presented at the Great World Exhibition in London in 1851. The technological improvements continue through the years, and the corrugated galvanized iron was created. It was invented in the 1820s by the British architect and engineer Henry Robertson Palmer. Its use spread in rural architecture in England, France, Austria, Holland, and the United States. And with more innovations from the steel industry in the 20s and until the 40s, the double T profiles and steel of higher quality and were created, and the quality was higher, and it lowered its price. In 1867, Charles Drake of the Patent Concrete Building Company had patented the use of iron formwork panels instead of wood and began constructing cast iron buildings, specifically and especially in Soho in New York. There are three very significant buildings that represent this era. The first one is the Crystal Palace of Joseph Paxton. This, as I mentioned before, the cast iron was presented in international fairs as a novelty. So this was the first case this Crystal Palace is where the first exhibition in 1851 was held. The promoters of this exhibition wanted the fair to have great social impact, and for this they decided to build a unique building that would house the stands from different countries and their technological innovations. So Joseph Paxton won a competition of the design of this building with this very emblematic and original building. His project constituted a novelty in relation to the architecture of the time because of its exterior appearance and its construction and the construction system that it used, which began a new trend of using new materials for architecture. As we can see, he designed a building that was clearly influenced and designed as a greenhouse architecture, which is a kind of design that he had already worked with. We can see that it is built with a lot of glass, and it achieved a big open space full of natural light that had, and the advantage that was that the pieces were prefabricated, so it could be assembled and dismantled without being destroyed. The building, the structure, was made from standardized pieces that arrived finished from a factory, and they were prepared to be assembled. So the building construction process consisted of just assembling the general structure and placing the glass. Um, Something similar happens with the Gallery of Machines by Ferdinand Durtet and Victor Contamin. This surprise because of its dimensions. It was 420 meters long and 115 meters wide. Its width was obtained with a single arc built into half parabolas that articulated at their union. Its greatest light achievement um, until the arc uh, or bolt. Its system was also made with prefabricated elements like Paxton, and it allowed a quick assembly and disassembly. And finally, we have the most famous one, which is the Eiffel Tower. Its author, Gustav Eiffel, he was an expert engineer in construction of bridges and railway stations and other iron buildings. The tower, made of iron, was 321 meters high, and it was considered the tallest construction in the world until 1931, when it was surpassed by the Empire State Building of the in New York. 2 years. It took 2 years to build this tower, and from the beginning, it was very controversial work. It was claimed that it would be dismantled, and it was highly unsightly, was considered very ugly, and that it looked more like a factory than than a monument. But we know now that it didn't happen. The construction is still there in Paris. It's very iconic, and well, Gustav Eiffel built this, achieved to build this tower the same way Paxton did. He won a contest where he would build this representation of the cast iron architecture. Um, well, I think that as many and as most artistic movements, this type of architecture is merely a reflection of the time and the technological advances of a specific period, which in this case is the 19th century mainly. Uh, the purposes were more aesthetic, I think, and not so practical. But I think it is impossible to deny the influence that these kind of buildings have in modern architecture, and how they have been integrated into modern structures and buildings. This was all. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments. Thank you.